going. Oh, recording in progress. That's what Zoom tells me. And already many of you are there and waiting, and you guys are so good. Let me know in chat if you can hear me, okay? Those of you who've been here before, you know how to go to chat and type something in. Let me know if this is coming through for you, and that is great. Thank you, Linda, wonderful. Now, for those of you who have not been with me before, chat is how you can ask me questions, and you can comment to each other on chat, and that is a wonderful thing. But it is a webinar, so nobody sees you or hears you. So you can still, you know, tell your kids to be quiet or stir the pot in the kitchen or whatever you need to do while we are together. As you know, if you've been with me before, I often ask you to tell me what's in your glass during the happy hour. And I always say it doesn't matter what's in your glass. What matters is that we have poured ourselves a beverage. We're sitting down, we're relaxing, and we're taking time together to talk about one of the most life-affirming things on earth, which is plants. So, okay, good. You're already telling me what you're drinking, and it all sounds wonderful. Right now, I have my Plant Geek mug with passion tea, Tazo passion tea. It's purple. And my son used to say that it's the herbal tea that tastes as good as it smells. So that's it. And I will have another beverage later after this because, as you know, I don't drink and Zoom. Now, we always give it a minute for people to gather, and then we'll get started with the presentation. After the presentation, I will take any questions up till 6 o'clock, all right? If there are questions typed in chat that I don't get to before 6, I will save the chat and I will answer those on the blog in the next couple of days on the Hyannis Country Garden blog, okay? So if you've been with me before, you know that's how it works. And if this is your first time on a happy hour, welcome. And everything that in your glasses sounds wonderful. And I am just so glad that you are here with me tonight. So we are talking about houseplants. And let me get this thing started here by sharing my screen. And we will play the slideshow. And here we are off and running. How perfect is that? Okay, if you have questions and you're watching on Facebook Live, you can type them into comments, but I will answer them after this presentation or sometime tomorrow. They will get answered there on Facebook, but it's too much for me to juggle Zoom, Facebook, you know, my cup of passion tea and all of that. So forgive me for waiting a little while to answer your questions. Everybody else can type a question in chat anytime it comes to them, and I will then respond to you after the slideshow is over. So we're talking about houseplants tonight. And here is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about matching your plants to your home, first of all right? And how, the things that you need to think about when you bring a houseplant into your house. We're going to talk about matching plants to your life because, you know, houseplants aren't the only aspect of our lives, right? There are many things going on in our lives, and you need to fit the right plants that are going to work well with your life. So that's a second thing. We're going to talk about the benefits of indoor greenery. You know, what does it bring to you? And it brings a lot, okay? We're going to talk about displaying and staging indoor greenery. And that's going to be fun because you can have fun with that, particularly at this time of year. This is a good time to kind of play around with that houseplant staging and displaying for yourself. And of course, we're going to talk about keeping them alive. And the main way that people lose houseplants, the main reason that houseplants die, okay? So we're going to start out with matching plants to your home. And what that is all about is considering how much light, how much sun comes in the various rooms of your house. This is an immense begonia in an east-facing window at my house. And it gets illuminated, all of those weirdo red thready looking things. They almost look like undersea creatures, don't they? That's a part of this begonia, and they get illuminated by the morning sun. And where the sun comes up and how much sun each window gets is key information for you for houseplants. Where your heat and AC vents are, good to know and very important for where you put your houseplants. And of course, whether the houseplants are going to fit in your room. So first we're going to talk about light, and it's really important to know what direction your windows face. If you're not sure, you can get an app with a compass on it for your smartphone. Use a compass, you'll instantly know, okay? But also you'll know because the sun comes up in the east in the morning, southeast in the winter, right? And it sets in the west and in the evening. And so where the sun comes up and goes down tells you, what direction your house faces, and how much light comes into your windows is key information for keeping your house plants happy. So know where the sun comes in the winter, know the areas that are the brightest light, know the windows that get direct sun in through the window and those that just are bright, all right? All of that will tell you what plants will do well in those windows. Now, many tropicals thrive in the house in areas where there is only partial light. This is my mother's monstera that was in her room when she was in assisted living for several years. And it's a good 8 or 10 feet away from an eastern facing window. But the reason it did so well, and the reason that so many of the tropicals do well in the house, is that they come from parts of the rainforest where they are underneath the canopy. And the tall, canopy plants that are up above them are so big and so lush and so tall that these plants down below, or the ones that are kind of climbing up the trees like monstera does in tropical places, those plants get either filtered light, indirect light, or maybe dappled sunlight. So they are perfect for our houses because they don't require full dead-on sun. And you come into the country garden greenhouse and you see this amazing variety of tropical foliage plants, and most of them are pretty forgiving. Most of them do not need full dead-on sun, southern exposure windows. Most of them do well in a variety of light conditions. Now, anthuriums, this is a plant that I particularly love because it blooms 12 months a year. You have those colorful flowers, those funky looking, waxy, tropical looking flowers 12 months a year on this plant. And it doesn't require direct sun. It only requires a very bright location. So I have had one in constant bloom for 3 years that is some distance away from an eastern facing window, but it's in a room that is very bright. It's a happy plant, constantly flowering. It's a wonderful thing. Some plants are so versatile, the snake plant, for example, and please don't call it mother-in-law's tongue. That's anti-women, anti-mother-in-law. I, as a mother-in-law, object to that. Call it a snake plant. Sansevieria would be even better. This is a plant that you can put in a southern window, dead on sun and heat, or you can have it growing in a northern window with no direct sun at all. You can have it growing 4 feet away from, a slider or whatever in a fairly bright room, you can have it growing with fluorescent lights in an office. It will do well, right? It'll grow pretty much anywhere. Spider plants are very versatile as well. They'll grow in such a variety of light conditions. So those are plants that are useful to know about because you can kind of switch them around and they'll do just fine. Some plants, however, need sun, direct sun, which means a southern or a southwestern exposure, and it means a southern or southwestern exposure that is not blocked by trees. So that's the other thing to look at. It's not just the direction, but whatever is going on outside your house, that would play a role as well. You might have a south-facing window, but if the neighbor has a whole row of Leland cypress or green giant arborvitaes 10 feet away, you're not going to get full sun, particularly in the winter. So sun and some plants need it. The herbs, for example, if you are keeping herbs in the house, it's in the winter, you're going to want the most sun possible. I have a rosemary that I am saving until next year. I take it in and bring it out, and that goes in one of my few. I don't have a lot of southern facing windows, but that one will go in a southern facing window because it needs as much sun as possible. Citrus plants should be in as much sun as possible, south facing windows. Now, if any of you have questions about your citrus plant, you can type those in chat and we'll get to them later. This is a plant that can be a little problematic indoors in the winter. They're prone to scale, they're prone to mites, citrus spider mites, you know, so it can be a little bit problematic, and you need to decide, you know, whether it's worth jumping through the hoops for those kumquats, which that's a kumquat plant, or those Mayer lemons. But if you are keeping a citrus plant, southern window or under lights, geraniums, pelargoniums, if you've kept those from the summer, you're going to want those in as much sun as possible. I have a variegated geranium that I keep from year to year, and that gets prime time in a south-facing window as well. There are many plants that tolerate very low light, and here are many of them, including many of the ferns. You can have a fern in a very bright location or a low light situation, and it does fine. Scheffeleras do fine in low light situations. So we have a country garden in the houseplant area. We've got houseplants for low light situations grouped together. And of course, you can always ask Ashley or Marcia in the greenhouse for recommendations if you've got a low light situation. A peace lily lives fine without much light, but if you want it to bloom, it needs at least 2 hours of direct sun. So if you want that peace lily to bloom, put it in an eastern facing window, or put it in a part of your house where when the sun comes in at an angle for a couple of hours, it hits that plant directly. Then you can get it to come into flower. These are not difficult plants to bring into bloom, provided they have a couple of hours of direct sunlight. And many people think that because it lives in a low light situation, that it doesn't need light in order to flower, but that's not true. So eastern window is ideal, or as I say, a place where the angle of the sun coming in will hit that plant. If you don't have much light, or if you don't have any light, you can use grow lights or fluorescent lights on a timer. This was my son and daughter-in-law's house that they used to live in, and this was an attic space that they kind of made into a meditation room. And just the addition of a few plants and those Christmas lights hung from a pole made it a really appealing, serene space. And all it took were those plants and a fluorescent light on a timer up above. The plants were great, and the space was very inviting and restful. This is my friend Ellen Zacco's house when she lived, or apartment, I should say, when she lived in New York City. She literally had a brick wall about 8 feet away from her window. And you can know the amount of light that came through that window. Not much. If you're familiar with the play or the movie 1,000 Clowns, at one point, the Jason Robards in the movie looks out the apartment window and there's a brick wall right there. And he's comments that the light conditions in his apartment are always twilight in February. Well, Ellen's apartment had twilight in February, 12 months of the year. So what she did was that she had an electrician install fluorescent lights here going vertically on this side of the window, on top horizontally above the window, and on the right side going vertically on that side of the window. And then she made this window treatment that hid the lights. The lights were on a timer, which allowed her to have this wonderful selection of different houseplants that were thriving and healthy. And she had those lights on a timer and easy to maintain and keep them growing well. So that's an idea for those of you who have little to no light. You want to keep plants away from the radiators, wood fires, air conditioning, vents, all of those extreme heat or cold, drafty locations. This is my wood stove, and there is a reason why I don't have a collection of houseplants on this mantle. I have fun with my mantle. I change what's up there at least 3 times a year. This particular theme that I did in January was a walk in the woods, and it was inspired by the wacky painting of a tree that my oldest son did. But there's a reason why I don't put plants there, right? Because they're not going to do well with that fire underneath. It's the same way with a radiator. If anybody has an old-fashioned, hot water radiators, it's the same with any floor hot air heating. You want to keep plants away from drafts, particularly very hot and very cold drafts. And finally, you need to know, is this plant going to fit in my house? Or am I going to have to devote an entire room to the plant? Sometimes it's worth doing it, and sometimes maybe not. There are ways, by the way, if you have a very large house plant, there are many ways and many plants that can be cut down and made small again. And if you want advice about that, send me a picture to my Country Garden email, clfornari@countrygarden.com. I'll type it in chat later, and I'll explain to you how you can make that plant smaller. So I have a friend who had a Norfolk Island pine that got so large that it took up the entire guest bathroom, because that room had a skylight in it. And so the plant was very happy. The guests couldn't go in there to use the toilet, the tub, or the sink. So we have to, we have to know what space is worth sacrificing for our plants. Let's talk a little bit about matching the plants to your life, because we all have lives, right, that extend far beyond houseplants. We have kids, we are cooks, we we go out and run errands, we walk dogs, we read books. There's so much going on in our lives, and we need to make sure that we have the plants that fit with what we are doing. So for example, are you in an office all day? Maybe you're in an office where you can't have plants. And if that's the case, wouldn't it be wonderful to come home to an indoor space where you are surrounded by greenery, right? To be able to, it would be like, going in a walk at the woods at the end of the day, only you're coming into your own house when it's dark outside at 5 o'clock. So, if you're in an office all day, even more important to have houseplants surrounding you. Maybe you can have them in the office, right? If you have light in the office, that's great. But, think about the fact that if you are in a work situation where you are not around plants, you probably need more of them when you get home. Do you travel frequently, right? Are you off on a cruise every month for a couple of weeks? Are you going to visit grandkids to help out with the grandkids once a month? Or, you know, are you traveling to see places like San Francisco? That's where this picture was taken. If you're traveling frequently, you probably want plants that are more forgiving, that can go a week or two, even if you hire someone to come in and water once a week, those plants are going to have to be a little more forgiving. And so having a plant that's very picky about its temperature or its water probably isn't for you. You would do well with that snake plant, because a snake plant, you could go away for 2 weeks and come back, and snake plant's going to be, hey, how was the trip? It's going to be fun. So think about that. Are your pets into everything? Do your cats and your dogs get into your plants? Well, if so, you're going to need to research your plants, and you can go, you know, you can research online, is pothos poisonous to pets or whatever your plant you have, and you will get a million responses, okay? So never assume that you know, but check it out and go through. If you're researching online, look at like 3, 4, 5 resources. Don't just take one person's word for it. So I've been fortunate. None of my pets have ever eaten my plants, so I don't have to worry about this, other than, you know, when I had an exuberant puppy who might knock them over once in a while. But that's something to consider. If you have a pet that tends to be more inquisitive or is bored during the day and tends to chew on things when he or she is bored, you're going to want to have plants that are safe for those pets. Do you forget to water? If you do, succulents are for you. There are plants. Succulents are the big ones. Of course, cacti and succulents, those are the big ones that can go for 2, even 3 weeks without watering, and they're not going to die. Now, if they go for much more than 2, 3 weeks, they're going to start to lose some of their leaves. So if you have succulents like these echeverias here, and their bottom leaves are dying, maybe you are not watering them enough. And I'm going to go into watering really thoroughly at the end about how to do it, because many people don't water correctly, and we're gonna go into that so that everybody knows what to do. And you always have to be realistic, all right? Even when you match the plants to your house and your lifestyle, you have to be flexible, and you need to know that sometimes plants die. You know, I often say, sometimes plants succeed against all odds, and sometimes plants die when we've done everything right. Plants are living things, and with living things, there is no guarantee. So we need to be flexible, all right? Sometimes they die. This happens to be an orchid. I'll probably show another picture of this later, but this happens to be an orchid that was kept too wet, and you see all those brown roots, those are all rotten. Questionable whether this plant can be saved, but the first step is to cut off all those brown rotten roots and see what might still be alive. That's a healthy root right there, and that's a healthy root right there. Okay, some indoor plants are temporary plants. They are seasonal celebrations, and you need to look at them that way. Yes, you can save a poinsettia from year to year, and sometimes it can be a fun thing to do, right? Is it ever going to look big, lush, and full like the one that came from the professional grower in the greenhouse? No, it's not. It's going to be leaner and meaner, and it's going to color up later, but you can keep it alive. Other plants like cyclamen are much harder to keep going from year to year. They require a dormant period. Most people assume that they're dead during the dormant period. Others, like the primroses that we see right now in the greenhouses, yes, you can keep them alive and plant them outside. They may or may not live, all right? But they are so valuable as a celebration of the seasons. That's why we love these plants, because they bring color and often fragrance into our homes. And the fact that we're not going to keep them from year to year is not the main point. You know, that's not the main thing. It's not that important. They are much more long lasting than a bouquet of cut flowers, right? Most of them will last at least 2 months, and they bring us pleasure. And so it's all right after the season that we are celebrating is over. It's all right to say to that poinsettia, this one is looking pretty sad right here. It's all right to say to it, thanks for coming. It's been great. Goodbye. I love these fairy primroses. We've got these in the greenhouse right now. And they are pretty. Many of them are fragrant. If you want one, smell them if you want a fragrant one. The yellows tend to be the most fragrant I've found, but they're so pretty and fresh. I don't care that they're not hardy here. I don't care that I can't plant them outside. You know, I don't care that they're only around for a couple of months. For that amount of time, it makes me hopeful about spring. And this one, the winter flowering jasmine, these come into the garden center at this time of year. And the reason that we only have them at this time of year is that these plants require short days and cool temperatures in order to bud up. So yeah, you can keep that plant from year to year and grow it on a support and fertilize it and blah, blah, blah. But you will have to, if you want flowers like this again next year, you will have to give it short days, and you will have to give it cool temperatures, like 50, 55 degrees temperatures in order to bring it into bud. But it's all right to buy one at this time of year. And I love the ones that are like this, that are just budded, so that I can have the full experience of watching them come into bloom. A plant like this is going to perfume an entire room. And so, you know, coming in after running errands or coming in from work and being able to smell that fragrance of jasmine in January indoors is a real pleasure. So why bother? Right? Why do you want to bother with seasonal plants or paying attention to watering or watching for the pests or putting them outside in the summertime? Why would you want to bother with that? Well, I think you want to bother because plants make people feel better. They do. They uplift our mood. And any number of scientific studies have shown this, all right? That they increase, you know, they do something with our endorphins and our serotonin levels and all of those things that make us feel better. And so having plants in your home makes you feel better. It makes our interior environments change. You know, our interiors, they're pretty static, right? I mean, even me changing my mantle 4 times a year, the living room otherwise stays pretty much the same. And when your house stays pretty much the same, you kind of get used to the same old, and you don't even see it anymore. Well, plants allow your interiors to change. Number one is they grow. Number two is you move them around, you know, take them outside in the summer, bring them in the fall. And number three, look at this. This is in my bathroom. And I have an immense begonia in the bathroom there, and it's eastern facing. And look at what the shadows do on the wall when the sun comes up in the morning. This is like a delight, right? It's like a silhouette show on my wall first thing in the morning, a visual surprise for me. And that's a wonderful thing about houseplants. Our interior environments change from hour to hour and day to day. And just seeing plants and the natural world, frankly, you get out in the woods, does the same thing. It lowers people's blood pressure. Again, scientifically proven, university studies, that having plants around you lowers your blood pressure. This was my mother's room in assisted living. She was a plant lady, and she used to periodically leave her door to her living area here open. And some of the residents who were particularly new would wander in thinking it was the facilities greenhouse. But this was, this environment was good for my mother's health. And I was just so pleased that she was able to enjoy that. And this is an eastern facing window. Didn't get a huge amount of light here. I probably took this picture in the morning, so it looks very light, but it was good for her health. Because being surrounded with plants, it gives us that feeling of nature. And that is good for us. Being in nature, just seeing nature, being reminded of nature is good for our health. There is a reason that hotels and public spaces, foyers of office buildings have plants. This is a hotel. I ask you to look at this picture right now and imagine how this hallway would look without those plants. Wouldn't be nearly as charming. It's a hallway into a dining room. Would not, if all those plants were gone, wouldn't be nearly as charming, would it? It wouldn't be nearly as welcoming, because it is the plants that draw people into that space and welcome them. Now, you don't have to go this far. This is a house in Florida, near Miami, Florida. It's a place called Patch of Heaven, and it is periodically open to the public, so you can Google Patch of Heaven to see about that. But they've got living walls in Patch of Heaven. They've got a stream that runs through the living room. Everything about the interior of Patch of Heaven is about plants. Even down to the poles in the kitchen are hand cast brass plants. So it's an amazing place, but you don't have to go this far, but it is fun to see it when people do go this far. Because plants generate wellness and a healthy environment. That's why we bother, all right? That's why we bother. All right, let's talk a little about houseplant staging. Now, if you have a big greenhouse, this is our front greenhouse at Country Garden, and if you haven't been in recently, do come in and I'll give you a little insider information about a very hot houseplant. I'm talking hot, trendy hot. Houseplant that we have right now at the end. So stay tuned for that. But, houseplant staging in a greenhouse is pretty easy. You kind of put them, the sunnier things by the most light, and then you have to put them everywhere and everything is happy because there's a lot of light. But most of us don't have greenhouses. I, unfortunately, do not have a greenhouse. So we can use, our windows more efficiently by staging plants, and we can design mini gardens in our houses with the same design tools that we use when combining plants outdoors in the garden. And number one, we put together plants with different foliage colors and textures. And never before have we had such an assortment of foliage, color, and textures of houseplants as we have now. It's phenomenal. The different colors, the different, leaf sizes, variegations, it's amazing. So that's where you start, with different colors and textures of foliage. And you want to place your plants at different height. Yes, you can have a shelf in front of a window and all the plants on that shelf at the same height, but it's a little more exciting, not to mention you fit in more plants, to have plants at different heights. So I played around with this at Country Garden one year, and I added some other objects, and you can do that too in your house. And I just want to show you a few ideas for staging houseplants that I did at, in a day in the windows at Country Garden. Number one, it's nice if you're combining plants in one area where there's something that unifies them. Now, sometimes it's the pots, sometimes it's the supports. In this case, it was the containers. I used a hanging tin basket and this tin trough and a tin bucket, and then we've got the tin watering can there, and that kind of pulled the whole thing together in this display. And putting plants in a trough like this is kind of fun because easy to water, right? The other thing that I did here that you might want to think about is I took a decorative bird bath, and that's where the air plants were displayed. If you display air plants in either a very shallow bowl, you might have a platter or a bowl in your kitchen cupboard that would be perfect for this. And you can put it on its own stand, or you can put it on a shelf, right? That's the perfect place for air plants. And then you can mist them and it goes right into the bowl and it's not a big deal. So have fun with that. In this display, it was the wire holders that unified the whole thing. And this one is an actual plant stand. This one and this one are stands that are made for gazing globes. And so I use them instead for houseplants by putting the saucers on the top. And then this guy, the tall one, that's not a plant stand at all. That's one of those metal obelisks that we sell to go outside into the garden. And in this case, I took and I hung a hanging basket houseplant from the top of it. And then I put the snake plant down below. And we've got plants at different levels, and it's still very light looking. Here is a case where I kind of repurposed items. And you probably have all kinds of items that in your garage, your basement, your attic, your house that you can repurpose to stage some houseplants. In this case, I took one of the planters that we sell to plant in outside in the season, right? And I used that to hold a houseplant. I took a white window box and I turned it upside down. And then I put this wooden crate thing that we had left over from, I don't know what, but it was recycled and put there to hold. And of course, the old stool, recycled, upcycled, and put there to hold this plant up high. And all of it is united by the fact that the plants are in white pots and the supports are white as well. And we've got, again, the variety of colors and textures of foliage, not to mention some flowering going on here that adds the color to this display. Here's a display where they are all at the same level. And I've added interest here by putting the succulents in different pots. They're all the same size pots pretty much that hold a 4-inch pot, but they're different because they're different glazes and different colors. And then to add a little excitement and that height, in addition to our friend the snake plant, I put a gazing ball there on a candle holder, and that adds some color to the whole display. Here's another gazing ball, and this is one where I had fun with purple. This was a very whimsical display because I can't look at these little pots that we have in the front greenhouse without smiling. Those faces, those goony faces, you know, they just appeal to me. And here they've got air plants in them. That's kind of a natural. I have these in my kitchen, and we use them for a bird feather collection. When we're outside walking and we find a bird feather, we pick it up and bring it home and put it in those guys. And so they all have feathers sticking out of their heads. But here, you know, we've got the purple combining, repeating, okay? And that repeats to kind of bring it together, the purple pot and the purple gazing ball, purple flowers, and this purple watering gizmo thing here. And then thin leaves and fat leaves and strappy leaves and round leaves. Again, the variety of foliage. This fern collection went into a trough, which was nice because ferns like to stay moist, and in the trough that keeps them moist. Ferns are fine in not much light, and so in a bright location, but not any direct sun, these make a pretty display. And again, the ferns come with different size leaves, and so make a pretty arrangement together. You can put your house plants in holders. Now, these bicycle holders, we've got a couple of these out in the store, and I think they're kind of cute. If you're putting your houseplant in a holder and you're watering it in the holder, make sure that after an hour or so that you empty any water out, okay? Because you don't want, you wouldn't want to fill these bicycle tubs up with water and have these houseplants sitting in it because their roots would rot, okay? So just know that about any decorative holder that doesn't have a drainage hole. And I think this is the last one. What unites all of these plants together are the taupe colored pots. You can use pots to get height in a houseplant display really inexpensively, right? By a terracotta pot, and they come in, taupe or in terracotta color. And you can turn a pot upside down. They're inexpensive, and put a saucer on, and you can instantly get some plants elevated and some plants below, and the whole thing blends together so beautifully. Don't forget about your walls too. There are wall hangers that you can plant plants in. Succulents are a good choice for wall hangers because most of them don't have drainage. So you want to plant in there that doesn't require a lot of water. And succulents are good in such a container. Now you want to keep your plants alive, right? Because when they are dying, that doesn't feel good to us. And it doesn't feel good to them either. And the prime reason that people's houseplants die are around watering issue. Either very old soil, we'll talk about that more in a second, too much water, or too little water. So let's talk about that. Not enough water. This is a dry peace lily. This was collapsing. And if you have a plant that's wilting like this, it's really dry because plants don't wilt until they're getting desperate. And so, that's a plant that needs more water. A peace lily is hard to overwater, by the way. These are plants that grow by stream beds in the wild. So you can keep a peace lily really wet and it's probably going to be fine. Just know that. Some plants they end up rotting because the soil is old and it decomposes and gets more compact over time, and it just doesn't have enough air spaces. And here are plants that were rotting and dying, not necessarily because they were overwatered, but because the soil was old and needed to be replaced. And this is that shot of the orchid with the rotting roots. This plant was overwatered. Many orchids today are sold not in orchid bark, but in sphagnum moss. And the reason they come that way is because they're easier to ship. They come from Hawaii and they're easier, or Florida, and they're easier to ship when they're grown in sphagnum moss. And at the grower, they can be real careful about the watering, but sometimes people tend to overwater them, and the sphagnum moss doesn't need that much water. If they're in orchid bark, you can water them every couple of days and the water just goes through the bark and they're fine. But if they're in sphagnum moss, you can use the old ice cube trick, 3 or 4 ice cubes a week, or just water them sparingly and check on their moisture level. Root rot can happen with old soil or bark, or it can happen on overwatered plants because the potting media breaks down over time and the drainage becomes worse. So you might assume that a plant is just the same as it's always been, and you're watering it the same as you always have, and yet it's not drying up as quickly because the potting mix is breaking down. In those cases, you want to repot. If you've got a plant that's been in the same pot for 4 or 5 years, it's probably time to take it out, rinse off the old potting media, or shake it off. The weather's warm enough this winter to do it outside during the day, and then put it back. You can put it back in the same pot, but with new potting media. And you never cover the drainage hole. It's there for drainage, all right? Never cover it up, not with a paper towel, not with a seashell, not with a piece of screen, nothing. Put dirt in there, potting mix. And no rocks or shards in the bottom of the pot. That's old school advice that we all learned from our moms. And this is my mom. This is her senior class picture. So that's old school advice. And we know it's bad for plants, all right? Bad for plants. Now, people can overwater and then they can water too little and let their plants get too dry. But I find that the majority of time, people are not doing too much or too little. they're doing something in between that I call a lick and a promise, or they're afraid of overwatering. And so they're just giving their plant a little bit of water at a time. And I'm going to talk about this. And here are some pictures to illustrate. This is a dry pilea. And you can see that this is dry because, first of all, the top of this is light in color. Wet potting mix is dark in color. If you could reach into this photo and touch this potting mix, you would feel that it's dry. If you could lift up the pot, you would see that it's light in weight. The other visual clue that this is a dry plant is right here. You see how that potting media has shrunk away from the pot. That's a dry root ball. So look for that. And when you see it pulling away from the pot, that's a dry plant. Here is a dry Dieffenbachia, AKA dumb cane. And you know why these are called dumb cane? Because if you chomp on them, which you should not do, they are not edible. If you chomp on them, there's a chemical in them that will paralyze your mouth temporarily and you can't talk. So, whoa. Anyway, here's a dry Dieffenbachia. Again, light colored potting media, right? Gap between the pot and the root ball. This is a dry plant. Here is a dry plant taken out. And what is it? This kind of shows you why it's important when you water to water thoroughly, because look at all these roots, right? There are a lot of roots in there. And if you only water part of that root ball, a lot of those roots are going to shrivel up and die. So I took that dry pilea and I took that dry dumb cane and I put them here on a saucer. You can see there's a little water that came. So I gave them a little bit of water. I pretended I was afraid of overwatering them and I gave them a little bit of water. And sure enough, I saw water coming out the bottom of the pots. And when many people see this, they think, oh, they've been watered. But then I took them out of their pots and you can see what the problem with that lick and a promise with that little bit of watering does. Because here is an area that got well watered. You can see how dark it is, right? Color is different, but look at all of this. That's still dry. And so if I just gave that plant a little bit of water like that, I would have these roots being very happy and all of these roots dying. Here is the same thing on the dumb cane, on the Dieffenbachia. Here, all of this soil and the roots in that area are still dry. And the only place that got wet is right down here. That's a plant that's going to start to fail because it hasn't been thoroughly soaked. The ideal is to water a plant well enough that you get water in the saucer, and they've got to have a big saucer to do this. If you don't have a larger saucer under your houseplants, you're probably not watering effectively because the water comes out into the saucer. Some of that water will be taken up. And so what you want to do is you want to leave the plant in that water for an hour or two. At the end of an hour or two, or maybe 3 or 4, it's not going to kill it for 3 or 4 hours. If there's still water, more, I would say, than a ½ an inch, then you can take an old towel and blot it up. All right, take an old bath towel and blot it up. But if it's gone, then it's gone, and that plant is a happy plant. If your plots have a built-in small saucer like this, there's no way you can do that without them overflowing. And these pots kind of encourage people to give a lick and a promise watering because they don't want the water to go out onto their tables or onto their floor. Understandable. If you've got this kind of a pot, you need a tray or a bigger plastic saucer under it so that you can thoroughly water that plant so the whole root ball gets saturated. And if they overflow into the tray or into the saucer. And we've got trays of all sizes at the store. We've got white, we've got gray, there may be another color too, maybe terracotta. So, you know, and they make watering so much easier. And we've got all kinds of plastic saucers like this that you can put them on as well. so that they catch all of that overflow and you can water effectively. And this, by the way, is on this week's blog. So if you want to tell somebody about it, all of these pictures about watering and this explanation and this graphic right here, right? All of this is on this week's blog at hyanniscountrygarden.com. So check it out. Shows the dry root ball, this licking a promise watering where some of those roots are going to die and some of them are going to be wet. This is how a thoroughly saturated root ball looks. It's dark, it's consistent over the whole thing. That's what you want. And if you lifted up that pot, once it's all saturated, it would be 3 times heavier than the dry one on the left. And we're going to get to questions now, but a little insider information. This is one of the hottest houseplants right now, pink princess philodendron, a variegated philodendron with pink on it. Why is it hot? Because it's hard to find. Why is it hard to find? Because you can only propagate this through tissue culture. And the interesting thing is once they grow on the tissues that they have, you know, the cells that they have taken and they propagate it with, they clone it with tissue culture, right? But they don't all come out variegated. Some of them just come out green and some of them are variegated. For that reason, it's become like there's a cult around this plant, pink princess philodendron. You will find them listed some places online, $35, $45, $75, $125. I think the ones in our greenhouse right now are $25. So we've got them right now, not hundreds, but if you have been lusting after pink princess philodendron, get yourself over to the greenhouse tomorrow and visit our breathing room. We've had a little greenhouse celebration every Saturday during January. So tomorrow and the next day, come in. They've got some herbal tea there. Ashley and Marcia are highlighting certain plants. You can check out all of the newest arrivals. There's a lot of fresh herbs there that'll make you feel like it's summertime. So come into the breathing room either tomorrow or over the course of the next couple of weeks. And by the way, I used on my graphic for the happy hour here, for the cocktail happy hour, I used a begonia because you may not know this, but all begonias are edible. People often ask about edible houseplants. There aren't that many, but begonias are edible. They are not, however, all delicious. So I'm not saying to, you know, chop up your begonia tonight into your salad because they're not all that tasty. What are the ones that are called nonstop? The nonstop tuberous begonias. The flowers on those are pretty good. Okay, so visit the front greenhouse because, you know, with all those plants, right? That's where people and plants thrive. All right, so we're going to come out of that and come to questions, and I'm going to open my chat and we will take questions coming down from the top up until 6 o'clock. And then, hold on. Okay. I've had 2 Fatsia plants. The first one I overwatered, and the second one now only has 1 leaf watering every 2 weeks. If it's doing all right, that's fine. But again, you want to, when you want to water it, you water it thoroughly, and then you wait until it's dry again before you water it. So that's the way to do it. What are some good ones for cat owners? You know what, go into the greenhouse off the top, since I'm not a cat owner and my dog doesn't have any interest in my plants. I don't keep those in the top of my head. But if you come into the greenhouse, that would be a good thing. And, or you can Google plants that aren't poisonous to cats. That, you know, that would be what I recommended. What do I do to get flowers on my 12 disciple plants? I've never heard of a 12 disciple plant. That's a common name I'm not familiar with. So do you know another name for it? Maybe? If not, if you don't know another name for it, send me a picture, and I'm typing my email right here, CLFORNARI @countrygarden.com. Okay, that's in chat. Send me a picture of it, and I will tell you, okay, because I'm not familiar with that common name. That's the problem with common names. 12 disciples, what could it be? Let's see, should you cut your geraniums back during the winter? I usually do it in February. If you wanted to do it now, that's fine. And what I usually do is I cut off about 6 inches off of the geranium and then, or 8 inches, and I take the lower leaves off of those and I root them. They're easy to root. Put a little rooting hormone powder on the bottom, stick them in some pots of fresh potting soil, and you'll not only have the mother plant coming back fuller this summer, but you'll have babies as well. House plants are my winter gardening. Good for you. That's good for you. Absolutely. Is there a way to tame aloe plants? My 4 are prolific and I don't want to keep moving to bigger pots. Start cutting off arms. I'm sorry to say that, but start cutting off some of their arms. You can prune them. You can prune them. So, you know, prune the outside a little bit. Bottom line, and don't move them to bigger pots, because every time you move them to bigger pots, that encourages them to get bigger. Bonsai plants are kept small, not because somebody's pruning them. Bonsai plants are kept small because they're in shallow dishes that constrict their roots, all right? And when the roots are constricted, the plant stays smaller. So if you have a Norfolk Island pine that you don't want to get so big that it takes up your guest bathroom, don't keep putting it in a bigger pot. Keep it in a small pot so that the roots are constricted. I have an almost 30-year-old ficus that is 5 feet tall and doing great. It's getting too big for me to move it, and I know the soil should be changed and updated. Any thoughts about how I can do this to keep her going? I would ask 2 very good friends to come over, maybe even younger friends, so that they have good backs and everything, and get a tarp and have a, have it at an event. And you don't have to put it in a bigger pot, but you could take it out, take off some of the soil, replenish with some fresh soil, put it back in the pot. If there's shards and everything in the bottom of the pot now, take those away, don't do it again. And then water it well. Probably coming up as the days are getting longer, like February, March, is a good time to do that. And I'd get help with it, all right? That's probably the best way to do it. I've been told to add small stones to the bottom of a pot for Mayor Lamage for added drainage. That is bad advice. That is old school advice. And I invite you to go into our front greenhouse, anybody's greenhouse, any commercial greenhouse, and look at all those plants. Come into our greenhouse and look at the Mayor lemon plants that are in the front of our greenhouse. There is not a rock or a shard in the bottom of any of those pots. And you know why? Because the commercial growers who raise these plants know that it's bad for plants. You have never bought a plant from a commercial grower with a layer of rocks in the bottom of it, right? Because for drainage, that's what the hole in the bottom of the pot is for. So don't do it, don't do it. Okay, I'm glad you love that plant's not getting enough water, Barbara, because that it's key. And that's where many people go wrong, because they don't want to overwater, and so they only partially water. And those pictures showed you exactly why that's bad. Should plants be misted during the winter? No, no, it's a waste of your time. It's a waste of time. And if the plants are at all dusty, it just makes a dusty crust. If you want to wash a plant off, put it in the shower, and with the shower not on hot, but on room temperature water, and give it a really good shower and then put it back. But the best way to add humidity, there are 2 great ways to add humidity into a room. One, of course, is with a humidifier, duh. But the second way to add humidity into the room is with more plants. So more plants. Where can I get the variety of hibiscus Northern Lights? I don't know. I don't know whether we have had that in the past or whether we can get it, but you know what you can do? If you call Country Garden and you ask to speak with Tracy, T-R-A-C-Y, and you tell her what you're looking for, she does the ordering of the plants and she will keep an eye out for it. She'll take your name and phone number and what you're looking for. And if she sees it on her availability list, she'll order it and give you a call. Okay, let's see. I am glad you all love this. Can you tell me anything about the prayer plant and how to take care of it? Yes, what you want to do is not let it get really, really dry. You know, there's some plants that like succulents or even African violets that can go really dry in between watering, but prayer plant is not one of them. It wants a more constant level of moisture. And so for my prayer plant and all of those in that family, I put my hand in and I feel the soil, right? And if it's feeling moist, it's good. And if it's starting to feel dry, then I water it. But again, you water the whole thing so that it gets very well saturated. Why do the lower leaves of my jade plant fall off? It could be that it's getting too dry in between waterings. I don't know how long you are watering it, or it could be that it's not in enough light. These are plants that really are full sun plants. They tolerate something like a eastern exposure, but they tend to lose foliage if they're not getting enough light, because the leaves are for photosynthesis. And if there isn't enough photosynthesis going on, the plant will drop leaves. And for a jade, either getting too dry in between watering or not enough light will do that. Okay, can kalanchoe be propagated easily? Well, I would try taking cuttings of it. I believe it's pretty easy to have cuttings, to take cuttings of it. It's a plant that's not as easy to bring back into flower. So it's 6 o'clock. I'm going to save the chat. Any questions that we haven't gotten to, I will answer on the blog coming up in the next day or so. So watch for that. Keep in touch. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope you have a wonderful evening and a wonderful weekend. Take care and enjoy your indoor greenery.